Welcome everybody, I hope you're doing well. I'm going to try to keep this intro as short as possible as I do have a tendency to go over 2 minutes, so let's see if I can shorten that down just a little bit. You ready? Go. Definition of a glow up. Let me just pull it up on Google real quick. There we go. A significant perceived positive transformation or improvement in someone's appearance, confidence, or overall lifestyle, often associated with personal growth and self-care. What does this have to do with weapons? We're going to look at the first round of weapons each class received and rank them in order from the biggest glow down to the biggest glow up. I'll go over the current stats of each weapon first, then go over the original stats of the weapon when it released and explain how either it was terrible back then and we somehow got the good timeline, or I think you get it. I know you're a TF2 player, but I'm not going to insult your intelligence too much. We're just looking at whether weapons improved or got worse. You got it? Awesome. Let's go. Alright gamers, you want to take a guess on what the biggest fall from grace in the history of TF2 was? You know it, I know it, your 80-year-old grandmother's full of teeth and Alzheimer's knows it. It's the Sandman.
Play ball! Oh, that's a skull fracture for sure.
The downfall of the Sandman ought to be studied by our youth. Even if you don't know the day one stats, if you've been playing since before Jungle Inferno 2017, you know that this thing was a little bit busted. And if you say otherwise, you either weren't playing at the time, or you're just lying to yourself. This weapon likely causes nightmares for the old-timers who played this game when the Scout update was first released. Speaking of the Scout update, the Sandman was part of the first round of weapons added in that update on February 24th, 2009. Otherwise it wouldn't have been in this video, I guess that makes sense. The current stats for the Sandman are as follows. Alt Fire will allow you to launch a baseball at 3,000 hammer units per second that will deal 15 damage or 23 if you hit a long-range moonshot. Raise your hand. How many of you even remember that was a stat? I forgot until I started typing this script. It's such a weird addition, and I know it's replacing a older ability. The moonshot used to have more of an actual purpose, but 8 extra damage is the best you can come up with? Stupid. You could put your hands down now, by the way. The ball can be picked up after firing if you track it down or waited 10 seconds for it to recharge. Then there is the main function of the ball being that it slows enemies down to 225 hammer units. Doesn't matter the class, 225 hammer units, which sucks because 1, Heavy for example moves at 230 hammer units, so it does pretty much nothing for the fat dude. Soldier moves at 240, so it isn't much better. Scouts, medics, and spies are affected a bit more, and I guess the other 4 classes as well. But even then, they can just mash strafe to pretty much nullify the slowdown downside because of Source Spaghetti. This works on most slowdown effects, like the Natasha as well. It's pathetic. For this particular nothing burger of an upside, we have the remnants of an older Sandman, but without what made the downside warranted. A 15 max health penalty. At least it isn't 30 like it was in mid-2010. Nope, I'm not lying, at one time it was 30 less health instead of 15. At least they came to their senses. Yeah, either way, pretty crappy. It's not a good melee. From the best melee in Scouts kit to the worst. I guess there's some contention on that, but it's down there. From the Dodgers to the 2024 White Sox. It's not even close. The old Sandman absolutely wipes the floor. Here are the original stats of the Sandman back on February 24th, 2009. Not February 25th, 2009, February 24th, 2009. This bat knocks out a mean stun ball. What the hell does that even mean? Valve had a weird way of wording things back in the day, so let me explain using my superb Team Fortress expertise. The ball itself had most of the same properties it does now, dealing 15 damage, moving at 3,000 hammer units per second. It did lack the 8 damage increase on moonshots, and moonshots were 20% further than they are now, so you had to hit them a little bit further away. But I doubt anybody's going to miss that 8 damage when they know what this thing was capable of. First, it didn't slow down enemies. It stunned enemies. No, I don't mean like how it was from the War Update of 2009 to Jungle Inferno, where it would put them in that little fleeing animation. It would full stun lock enemies. Some may remember when the Sandman from that era that I was talking about could stun lock if you hit a moonshot, which kind of goes back to what I was saying about moonshot having a bigger purpose. Well, it originally did that at all ranges. Well, I mean, there was a minimum range, but pretty much anything outside of point blank would fully stun lock them. It was ridiculous. On top of this, it was capable of stunning ubercharge players. I'm sure most of you have heard that fun fact. It's 100% true. It could stun lock ubercharge players for some reason. I think that'd be a pretty cool ability nowadays, but whatever. And what were the downsides for this insane upside? Maybe 15 less health? Maybe that 30 I was talking about? Nope. The downsides were no double jump and 50% less damage versus non-stunned enemies. Which, by the way, that latter stat was removed the next day on February 25th. Which is why I was saying February 24th, 2009, not February 25th. You heard me. The first thing they did to this insane weapon was buff it. I know, genius. There were some small differences also, such as being unable to fire the ball independent from the bat swing. It didn't have an alt fire, instead mouse 1 would automatically launch the ball as soon as you had it. It also took 5 seconds longer to charge, required a tad bit more distance to initiate the stun, or the effect it has now, and it could unrev heavies. You could do that. These do make a difference, but compared to the original stats, it's hardly worth talking about. I mean, holy hell, the original Sandman was a force to be reckoned with. Even with some of the quality of life stuff with the new Sandman, I think any skunt main would gladly take the 2009 version of the Sandman any day of the week. The ability to stun lock players in place, and they just couldn't shoot back, even Uber players, is utter insanity through and through. I think you can see why the Sandman takes the #1 spot for today's biggest glowdown on the list, if not in TF2 history, from king to peasant. Let's make our way over to the second place winner of the Which Weapon Let Themselves Go the Most contest. Oh, that was bad. Whatever, let's just go look. There's a million choices I could go with, well, 28, but no need to be a smartass. I do believe there's a lot of weapons that could take this spot here, but despite the current version being decent, I think there is a weapon we're all thinking of right now that would be a perfect contender. It's often paired with the most annoying melee in the game that is often used by people who like Japanese animation a little too much. It's the Dead Ringer.
Shall I carry us to victory? I don't mind.
Easily the most controversial weapon in the game. Sure, you have the Flog, Short Circuit, Wrangler, Vaxator, but the Dead Ringer is often cited as the most conceptually poor design weapon in the game. Despite being such an old item, it still feels like the black sheep of spy weapons, and honestly, TF2 as a whole. The watch was added in the Sniper vs. Spy update on May 21st, 2009. The current Dead Ringer is a rather simple item, which I'm sure you know, but this thing has a weird history, so we're going to go into the real nitty-gritty. So you just gotta bear with me. Pressing mouse 2 or whatever you have the alt attack bound to, I don't know, will pull out a pocket watch, during which time you cannot shoot, but if you take even a single point of damage, you will feign your death. 75% of the damage taken from the initial attack will be resisted, and you will drop a fake corpse, mimicking your death, feigning your death. You will also gain a 3-second speed boost, which is not tied to your cloak, by the way. You can decloak and retain the speed boost, which is cool. You won't shimmer when running into an enemy or getting shot, and you'll be immune to afterburn during this duration as well. I said the initial damage resistance is 75%, but after your first hit, this is reduced immediately to 65%, and over the course of the 3 seconds you have the speed boost, no shimmer, and afterburn and immunity, it will be lowered to 20%, which is the same as the other two watches by default. When you take damage with the watch out and you feign your death, 50% of your cloak will be consumed instantly, which used to kind of confuse me a little bit, but all this means is that if you were to take damage and uncloak immediately, you would have to wait at least half the recharge duration. We'll get more into why this is an important stat later. The 40% cloak duration is to offset that 50% of your charge being eaten penalty. It doesn't completely make up for it, as you can probably tell, since you still only effectively have a 7-second cloak duration, 8.2 with the l'étranger, or however the hell you pronounce it, rather than the default 10. Then there's the 50% faster regen rate, making it so that the Dead Ringer only takes 20 seconds to regenerate instead of 30 from 0%. Since most spies just spam this thing, the recharge time will be more like 10 seconds, but if you let the cloak completely decay, it will take 20 seconds to recharge back to full. Finally, there is the downside that I thought was written, but apparently it isn't. You cannot recharge the Dead Ringer from ammo sources, whether cloaked or uncloaked, including ammo packs, dispensers, and payload carts. Obviously, you can touch the resupply cabinet. The Dead Ringer is an annoying weapon that, in the hands of a good spy, can completely nullify a lot of what you can do to him, especially if he's running it with the Kunai vs. Kunai. Despite this, as pretty much every TF2 player with more than 3 months of experience with the game has likely learned this information, since it's on page 2 of the TF2 Bible and is passed around like a school thought at a frat party, the original Dead Ringer was just plain stupid as hell. There's a reason it's so far down on the GLOWUP's list. It is not what it used to be. It definitely peaked at the beginning. First, the original design of the Dead Ringer and general principles are mostly the same. You take it out, you can't shoot, take damage, cloak and fake your death. There are small things like the fake corpse being a little bit less convincing since I don't believe it could jib, be decapitated, and it just acted really strangely. You might have heard of the croissant spy, but this thing was so stupid strong that hardly even matters. You could pretty much say, hey, I am using the Den Ringer, and it would still be an upside. There's a lot we have to go over, so I'll try to keep it as organized as possible, but some of this might get kind of jumbled up. Currently, the initial damage resistance is 75%, but when the weapon was first added to the game, it had a staggering 90% damage resistance, and as I'm sure you've heard, a full health spy could quite literally survive a backstab if he had it out. This is where the info gets a little bit fuzzy. Since it was added in 2009, I can't find anything that goes against what I'm saying, but take it with a grain of salt. Instead of the damage resistance scaling like it does now, from what I could tell, while cloaked, it stays somewhere between 65 and 75% resistance. I can't tell exactly because before 2015, I want to say, the game had something called random damage spread, which would roll each time you did damage and give you somewhere between a plus or minus 15% multiplier for some weapons and plus minus 10 for others. And then stuff like the grenade launcher was plus minus 2. It got kind of weird. And it was taken out of the game with the exception of when you take fall damage. But the point is that it's not easy to tell, and the videos I've watched seem to be somewhere between 65 and 75% resistance, not the full 90, but I don't know for sure. The Den Ringer, since May 26, 2009, has eaten either 100%, 40%, or 50% of your cloak on use. However, the Den Ringer was added on May 21st, 2009, meaning when it first released, it did not eat any cloak whatsoever. Remember when I said I would get into it in a few minutes? I'm sure you understood what I meant right away, but time to cash that check. This means that for approximately a 5-day period, if you were to take damage, then uncloak quickly, you could regain your cloak meter almost instantly. Yeah, it was pretty busted. Now, when the weapon first came out, you could not pick up ammo packs to regenerate cloak. For those who don't know, from June 2009 to Jungle Inferno 2017, you could pick up ammo packs to regain lost cloak, but then they removed it again. But even so, this weapon was so busted, it hardly even mattered. While you originally didn't gain a 3-second speed boost like you do in the modern day, instead of a 3-second afterburn immunity and not shimmering when walking the players are getting shot, it would last the whole cloak duration, which according to patch notes was also 1 second longer than the current, as it is listed at 8 seconds rather than 7. I'm not sure the validity of this, and the timing of YouTube videos aren't very accurate, but according to the original description and the patch notes, it did last 1 second longer than it does today. Finally, for the upsides, it took 18.5 seconds to regen cloak, rather than 20 when at 0%. The only thing that was worse about it compared to today is, believe it or not, the decloak sound effect was louder than it is now. There may have been little tidbits I looked over because this weapon is a convoluted mess and it's had a crazy history, but I think I got the general gist of it and I'm pretty sure you did too. Regardless of any small details I may have looked over, like the cloak meter's name being changed from Cloak to Feign in the Tough Break update, the original Den Ringer is leagues above the current one. If the modern day Den Ringer is grinding out in AA, the original Den Ringer is prime Barry Bonds hitting balls in the San Francisco Bay. Maybe more like Hank Aaron. Because I do believe the Sandman has a worse fate overall than the current Den Ringer. Unlike the Firewood Scout Calls of Bats, the Den Ringer is still serviceable now. With that over, let's go look at a soldier weapon. I think you already know which one. I'm sure the vast majority of you are expecting this weapon to be pretty far down on this list, especially if you know your TF2 history. But here's the thing, I'm not exactly sure how I want to rank it. Either way, we're here, so let's kind of talk it through. I'll tell you what I mean. We're talking about...
You're a spineless worm. You are a mistake of nature. You are walking vomit.
As you know, the Equalizer was added in the War update in December 2009, but it would be split into 2 weapons come the Pyromania update of 2012. The Equalizer would become the Equalizer and the Escape Plan. The Escape Plan is pretty good and shares the original Equalizer model. Yeah, if you didn't know, the black pickaxe model used for the Escape Plan is the original model for the Equalizer. So the gray pickaxe we now know as the Equalizer today got the name, while the Escape Plan got the model. So that's where our problem kind of comes in. Do I compare the equalizer to the weapon that shares the name? Do I compare it to the better pickaxe? Or do I compare it to the one with the original model? Do I compare it to both? Well, either way, I don't think the placement would change that much. Maybe this and number 4, biggest glowdown, I guess you could say, would switch depending on which one I talk about and compare it to, but it's not that big of a deal. I'm going to predominantly compare it to the weapon that shares its name, so the equalizer up against the equalizer, not the escape plan, though real quick, let's go over both for the sake of argument and content. The modern day equalizer, the gray version, was technically added in 2012, but in reality came out in 2009 and is a simple 2-stat weapon. Damage scales based on health for the downside of 90% less healing from sources like medics and dispensers while the weapon is deployed. At full HP, the equalizer only does a measly 33 damage, while at 1 HP you'll do up to 107. The escape plan, on the other hand, has your speed scale based on health. At normal HP while deployed, you'll move at the 80% standard for soldier, but as your health decreases, your speed increases all the way up to plus 60% as your health gets below 40. At least they don't make you get to 1 health this time to get the max benefit. This makes it so you're almost as fast as Scout with low HP. This major bonus comes at the downside of being marked for death while active and for a few seconds afterwards, so if you put it away, you're marked for, I believe it's 2 seconds. So you take mini crits while deployed and for a few seconds after. It also shares the same 90% less health for medics and dispensers while active penalty that the equalizer has. As you most likely already know, the modern day equalizer and even the escape plan doesn't hold a candle to the equalizer we got on release. I said the weapon got split into the escape plan and the equalizer. As you can imagine, this means that it was originally merged. It was one weapon. So as your health got lower, yep, you gained an additional speed boost as well as damage. The damage was significantly higher as well. The speed boost was the same as it is today, but the 107 damage was not the cap. Instead, it could reach up to 162 with a single swing. Yeah, this goes without saying, the original equalizer absolutely wipes the floor. Hit like Mike Tyson and ran like Usain Bolt. The best part, the mark for death penalty was not the downside on release. Instead, it had a downside of no health from healing sources while active. It is a little bit weird because I was looking at old footage and apparently this wasn't listed on the weapon day 1, but it still had this downside. It wasn't a straight upgrade. But, I mean, you just put the weapon away and boom, you're good. I mean, Jesus, 162 damage while moving at almost the speed of Scout is a bit ridiculous. There you have it. The original equalizer was absolutely insane, and depending on the skill of the soldier using it, could be the biggest glow down so far. But the Stand-Man stun ability was insanely broken, even with people who didn't know what they were doing, and the Dead Ringer's damage resistance was absolutely busted, so that's why it's at least number 3. If we're comparing it to the escape plan, I guess you could say possibly the next weapon we're going to go over would be a little bit more of a glow down, but because, like I said, I'm comparing it to the equalizer versus the equalizer, it gets the number 3 biggest glow down today. While the damage and speed was insane, it did, at the bare minimum, require being gravely injured. Those weapons were also just ridiculous, full stop. No strings attached. With that, it means we're moving out of the podium winners for glow downs, so maybe the podium losers? Though there is one that is still in running for major glow downs of TF2 history, but because of buffs it received recently in the TF2 timeline, it doesn't get to be the bottom 3. I'm saying too much. Let's just go look at it. This weapon here has been every kind of useful and useless. It has been absolutely busted, really good, legit ass, and decent. It's been over more hurdles than a track star in his late 30s. The weapon I'm here to discuss for being quite a glow down is the extinguisher for Pyro. This axe, like I said, has gone through a lot over the years, and despite being one of the oldest unlocks in the game, releasing all the way back on June 19, 2008, older than 25% of TF2's player base, the current state of the weapon is fine, it works, but it can be a bit underwhelming, and while you're not throwing by using this weapon, you aren't running the power jack, therefore you're committing a sin against humanity. The current extinguisher, in my opinion, is just weird. The design is not super straightforward because the main upside of the weapon is that it mini-crits burning enemies, which seems pretty straightforward for sure, but it's the second stat right here that kind of throws the consistency right out the window. You see, the damage scales based on the remaining time of afterburn. The lower the afterburn timer, the less damage it does. The longer the afterburn timer, the more damage it does, which I guess somewhat makes sense because of a stat we'll get to in a minute, but regardless of it making sense overall, it's still a bit weird and it's a bit hard to tell how much damage you're going to do unless you got the stopwatch on you. It ranges from 86 at the very lowest to 167 at the very highest, with a base damage of 44 against enemies who are not on fire, 43 against buildings. The final upside is the fact that you get a speed boost on the killing blow if the enemy was currently on fire. For the downside, you have a damage penalty I alluded to, being 33%. No random critical hits because it's a weapon with on-demand crits, sort of, and a 35% holster speed penalty. Finally, while not a listed downside, it sorta is, hitting a player with the axe will do heavy damage and then extinguish them. Extinguisher, get it? This is what I meant by the damage scaling technically making sense. It does less damage the less time the afterburn timer has because they took significant damage from the afterburn already, but if you hit them while the timer still has significant time, it will deal more damage as they haven't taken much damage from the afterburn itself. It makes sense, but it's not straightforward because you're not going to always know exactly how much time they have. It's not like it used to be where it was always 10 seconds of afterburn, now it's 4 to 10, so you're not always sure. It's just a little bit weird. Anyway, the current extinguisher, while not the power jack, therefore bad, is a solid weapon on its own and can be good if you like the more old school puff and sting style of pyro gameplay. Which is cooler, by the way. Puff and sting pyros slay pussy. Though the old extinguisher pyros certainly did not, and were the epitome of virginity, via being involuntary celibates. While not as outright broken as some other weapons we discussed today, as you can imagine, because it's so far down on this list, it was pretty freaking good. The OG axe had just 3 stats. It used to crit versus burning enemies, for the downside of 50% less damage versus non-burning players. Do you see the problem? That little bit at the end, 50% damage against non-burning players. Sure, you only did 33 damage to those who were not on fire for some reason. Maybe if you got caught with your dick in your hand or something, but believe it or not, lighting people on fire with the flamethrower that you hardly have to aim, this weapon would lose the damage penalty and full crit enemies on fire. And it didn't have the extinguish stat it does now. So you could continue to bludgeon these enemies to death with a barbed wire covered axe for 195 damage a pop. I guess there was the other downside of no random crits versus non-burning enemies. Yes, it was worded that way, but I mean, who needs random crits when a single flame particle, which used to last 10 full seconds by the way, afterburn used to last a full 10 seconds regardless of how much damage or how much time they spent engulfed in flames, was enough to supercharge your melee weapon. Sure, this was 2008, and players were not as good as they are today, and Air Blast was a new mechanic that most didn't yet understand. Yes, if you didn't know, Air Blast was a mechanic on release, and when it was added, it costed 25 instead of 20, took 25% longer between Air Blasts, movement locked enemies, pushed them back the same distance and height every time, and didn't mini-crit boost projectiles. Mini history lesson for those in the chat who care. Regardless, the extinguisher was really good and would be busted to high hell in today's game. I mean, imagine pyros with current skill pyros here in 2025 and beyond, using that version of the extinguisher. All hell would break loose. While the current one ain't bad, it's just a monumental glowdown. We're going to take a bit of a shift. 3 of the last 4 weapons were melee weapons. The one we're going over right now is not a melee weapon, but with that being said, it does go well with most melee weapons. I'm of course talking about the Charge and Targe. Everybody already knows how the Targe works for the most part, but let's go over the stats for a bit of a refresher. The Charge and Targe is a shield item for Demo Man. It's a secondary to be specific. The blue text for the shield is its resistances, which offer the highest resistance of the Trinity, with a 50% fire resistance and a 30% explosive resistance on wearer. This means Devilman's Pipes only deal a measly 70 damage while you have it equipped, and you have effectively 350 health against Pyros, 400 with the booties, and even more if you're using the Eyelander and have max heads. The main draw of the weapon is that you can press mouse 2 or whatever you have it bound to in order to charge forward. I think we all know that. The charge lasts 1.75 seconds at base. It will deal 50 damage if you run directly into somebody after a bit of distance has been cleared. It's an additional 10 for each head you have with the Eyelander if you're running the charge and charge with the Eyelander, which is part of the same set, so most likely. And if at least 60% or so of the charge is depleted, your melee weapon will deal a full critical hit. If you're between 25 and 59%, you'll deal a mini crit, excluding the Caber. The Caber is incapable of mini critting, at least in this fashion. And below 25%, you'll deal no additional damage. Charging will also remove debuffs you have at the time, but if you get hit while charging, whether it's Bleed, Girardi, Fire, Mad Milk, whatever, it will not be removed. This is solid, no doubt, and while many say the charge and charge is overshadowed by the existence of the Splendid Screen Tide Turner, they'd have to be a fool to call it bad. Seriously, it's a great shield, but as you can see, it isn't very high on this list. It's still in the negatives, the glow down side of the scale, so we're dealing with quite a menace to society. This is a breakdown of the original shield. When the Charge and Charge was released, it was team color, making it harder to see. That's why the Charge and Charge is painted yellow nowadays, but is red or blue in the old promotional art. You may have seen this on the main page for the war update. This isn't really a reason for the current iteration being a glow down, but I feel like I should bring it up. It's always a little cool tidbit. Everything in terms of charging is pretty much the same, but there were some little differences. First, it would always provide a crit after a shield bash. It still did have the 0%, 25%, 60% deal it has now, but if you were to run directly into someone, you would receive a crit for your melee weapon regardless of how much charge was left over. Whereas now, it is completely based on the amount of time charged, so a shield bash just does damage, it doesn't impact whether you get a crit or not. There are also some small differences, like it didn't remove debuffs, you couldn't charge while airborne, shield bashing didn't actually deal any damage when this weapon was first released, and it could not be refilled by the resupply cabinet, so it had to recharge completely naturally. And then finally, the charge depleted if you were air blasted rather than being halted. It was kind of strange. The old Charge Turb seems kind of underwhelming, but that's only because I've specifically left out one crucial part to this. It did have the 50% fire resistance it has today, but it also had a 60% explosive resistance, bringing a 100 damage pill to just 35. Yeah, listen, I think the current Charge and Charge is good, but the Shield Bash always granting a crit, crazy fire resistance, and even crazier explosive resistance is hard to look past. I believe the Charge and Charge explosive resistance also applied to yourself. Sure, the original Charge and Charge didn't allow you to trimp since you couldn't charge while airborne, but even in the modern game, no one is really doing that with the chargeable shields. The ability to wipe debuffs is cool, and it is a quality of life to be able to recharge the shield if you're near a resupply cabinet, but I don't believe these upsides of the current Charge and Charge come even close to rivaling the original one. Despite being close in function, especially when running the shield in a hybrid knight loadout like it was intended to, it's not even close. There may be some contention with this spot in the next pick, and honestly I could see why someone would want to flip them, but in my personal opinion, the difference between these two is smaller than the difference between the 2025 Charge and Charge and 2009 Charge and Charge. Let me know what you think after I talk about the next segment, but I think I'm going to stick with this. Original Charge and Charge, goated. In this spot, we have possibly one of the most infuriating weapons in TF2. Unlike the Denringer or Razorback, for example, it isn't because of the design itself, but rather all the stats that accompany a pretty simple premise. It's a good idea, just very poor execution. With that description, I'm sure those who log more hours in the game per day than the gym per week know exactly what weapon I'm talking about, or could come pretty close. It's the Wrangler.
Gotcha! This thing ain't on autopilot, son!
The Wrangler is such a well-designed weapon from a design standpoint. I know, real clever there. Controlling your sentry gun is such an obvious weapon idea, and I think it was close to being good, but it fell flat when they decided to make it unbelievably busted. With the number 2 on your keyboard or scroll wheel if you're one of those people, you can gain control over your sentry with an oversized laser pointer. The Wrangler gives you control over your sentry's aim, and what some people may not know, also gives you a bit of aim assist. There is some aim assist built into it. Yes, the Wrangler does assist you a little bit with aiming, because you suck. You can notice this when the crosshair is in one place, yet the laser is slightly shifted when you're trying to shoot somebody. If you pay close attention, you'll see it. With the Wrangler, you can also choose to fire bullets or fire rockets at will, assuming it's level 3. Your sentry will gain a 40% firing speed bonus if it's level 1, 50% if it's a mini sentry, and 33% or so with a level 2 and level 3. Likely because they already gained a firing speed bonus in the first place, 40% would be a bit ridiculous, I don't know. Firing rockets is also about 25 to 27% faster. The sentry will receive a shield that absorbs 66% of incoming damage, but heavily reduces ammo/health per wrench swing by 66%, which if you did math basically means absolutely nothing. Finally, when you put away the Wrangler or die with the Wrangler out, the sentry will be inactive for 3 seconds after being unwrangled. You know, the more I do this, the more I realize that some Team Fortress weapons have very interesting little details that aren't obvious unless they're pointed out to you, or you go through the patch notes. I don't think I need to say this, but I will, and it won't be the last time until we get to the real glow-ups. The Wrangler is a little different than the others because it still is actually kind of busted. You know, the current Deadringer, Extinguisher, and Targe are legit good weapons, with the older versions being unbelievably busted, but the Wrangler is still stupid strong in modern day. It's just that the original one was a bit stronger. And by a bit stronger, I mean pretty significantly. First, the original did not have a wrench hit penalty, which means because your sentry has effectively 3 times the health, your wrench swings were effectively 3 times stronger. In reality, it was a normal swing, just that because the shield was giving you a 66% damage resistance, it did more. On top of this, the Wrangler's aim assist was significantly stronger than it is now, and the sentry lacked damage falloff, making mincemeat of enemies well outside the reasonable sentry gun's range. There were some other little tiny tweaks that I could go over, but these were the 3 medium-sized changes that put the Wrangler so low on this list. I mean, you've all seen the video of an engineer on Barn Blitz absolutely tanking a heavy Uber. To be fair, I believe at the time Heavy's damage to sentry guns was a bit lower. Yes, if you didn't know, sentry guns have an inherent damage resistance to miniguns, which was lowered, I believe, the gunmetal update, but regardless, this was realistically possible because the original Wrangler didn't reduce the amount of healing and ammo gain from each wrench swing. The aim assist being significantly stronger and the no fall off was just the icing on the cake. So it deserves the spot it's been given today. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that a lot of you are going to be surprised about this next entry because it technically had no real changes. It functions nearly identically to how it did back in the day when it was added to the game initially. However, because of a technicality, a pretty big one at that, it would honestly be considered a sizable glowdown. At minimum compared to some other weapons on this list. I'm talking about the best melee weapon in the game, the direct hit.
This is my world. You are not welcome in my world.
I'm sure even some of you hardcore Team Fortress fans are struggling to see why I put the direct hit in this spot. Before I talk about that reason, let me go over the stats like I have for every other weapon. The direct hit was added in the war update back on December 17, 2009, and it is a rocket launcher replacement that is very, very front loaded. 25% more damage, which means you can do up to 140 damage at point blank, 80% faster projectile speed, and the ability to mini-crit enemies that are blast jumping or are knocked into the air via your rocket. This all comes at the downside of a 70% explosion radius penalty, which, as the name implies, heavily favors hitting an enemy directly rather than crowds. It's about the same size as a teleporter for reference. I'm sorry that I do this, but I feel like if I do it for one weapon, I should do it for the rest, as we need context to how the weapon actually works. I know most of you know, but sometimes there's little things that slip through the cracks, like did you know the Force of Nature and Soda Popper discard 2 shells when reloading regardless if you fired 1 or 2. Flare guns reload when holstered just like the Crusader's crossbow. Healing players with a medigun doubles health regeneration. You did? You knew that? Okay, then I guess never mind. But if you didn't know, now you do, and you see why it is important for me to go over the stats, even if some of them are kind of obvious. This applies to the direct hit as well. There has only been one minor stat change, yet this change is the reason why it deserves the spot it has. This right here. Back in 2009, it didn't say mini crits targets launched into the air via explosives, grappling hooks, or rocket packs. I'm pretty sure grappling hooks doesn't even work anymore. I don't know. Instead, it said mini crits against airborne targets. This may seem like a nothing burger, but if you played TF2 prior to 2015 and remember the reserve shooter before then, or you use the current atomizer post 2017 frequently, you know. You see, the atomizer, to my knowledge, is the only weapon that still has the airborne stat as part of its stat line. Airborne simply implies not touching the ground with your own 2 feet. Do you see the problem? I'm sure a lot of you picked it up right away. The reserve shooter from 2015 was often regarded as one of the cheesiest weapons because it would mini crit airborne targets, which include those who were falling and jumping. And this was the original way the direct hit worked. To be fair, the reserve shooter was a tad cheesier than the direct hit in this regard because it was hit scan, but nonetheless, the direct hit did mini crit jumping enemies. 162 damage for jumping. And it's a pretty fast projectile, so it's not impossible to hit. There may be a bit of contention with this one, but with how busted it could be, it's just insane how this passed through. And yes, I thought the same thing. No way this is right, but I managed to find a video in action. It did, in fact, mini-crit airborne enemies. I will admit, this placement in today's video is very dependent on how jump-happy your enemies are. The next 2 weapons I'm going over are a little less luck-dependent and were just really good when they were released. But because you could just be one-tapped as someone with a medic health or below for jumping and falling, I think even the edge cases give this thing a major bump up. Don't get me wrong, the direct hit is still solid today, but because of the cheese potential, it gets a bunch of extra credit. This and the next 2 items, in my opinion, are pretty tied, so if you want to argue these next 3, I'm perfectly okay with that, but let's go look at what these have to offer. Engineer just seems to get a lot of ridiculous weapons. Yes, this spot is an engineer weapon, but which one? If you've been around for a while or you're just a scholar currently attending TF University, patent pending, you already know what weapon I'm probably going to talk about. There were 4 added in the engineer update. Which one is it? Okay, I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to come out and tell you, it's the Gunslinger.
Ain't that a cute little gun?
I was dreading talking about this weapon. Actually, not so much talking about it, but rather typing out a script for it, just because the Gunslinger is a very convoluted weapon, so I'll try to work quickly. The Gunslinger was added in the Engineer update back in 2010, the last of the class updates, and the one that finally gave Engineer the ability to pick up his buildings. Kinda crazy that that wasn't always a feature. The Gunslinger is a melee weapon that trades out your regular sentries for miniature sentries, but before I go on and explain the intricacies of that, let's just throw out all the other stuff that's on the weapon card. The Gunslinger is visible on the player model at all times, and grants the Engineer 25 additional health, bringing up that 125 to 150. It also has a 3-hit combo mechanic where if you land 2 successful swings in a row on an enemy, the third one is guaranteed to be a critical hit. So in turn, the Gunslinger is unable to randomly crit. Now, time for the fun stuff, the mini-sentry itself. Here we go. The minis have 100 health rather than the standard 150 of the level 1 sentry, and deal half damage, 8 per shot instead of 16. However, they cost less, 100 metal instead of 130, construct significantly quicker, fire I believe 25% quicker or somewhere in that ballpark, have a smaller hitbox, about 3/4 the size, start at 50% health when constructing instead of 1, turn faster, and finally they don't drop any metal when destroyed, though if you do pick up the little scraps you will get ammo from them. I should have to point this out, but also mini sentries cannot be leveled up past level 1. I believe in the olden days there was a glitch that allowed you to do this, but this is not possible now, to my knowledge. I'm sure every troll domain in existence has PTSD when hearing the mini-sentry lock-on sound as they go to Market Garden, Paulo Gonzalez 2009 on PLR High Tower. I believe anyone with over 1,000 hours breaks it out in a cold sweat whenever hearing the mini-sentry lock-on sound. The mini-sentry is a force to be reckoned with, despite being such a tiny piece of machinery. Like I said, 3/4 scale to be exact. I could go on and on about this stupid little turret, but I don't want to insult your intelligence too much. Maybe just a little bit. But there is a very high chance that the majority of you guys who are watching this video have actually played TF2, so I'm sure that the majority of this is not new information to you. Though TF2 has obviously had quite a long history, so the original version of the Gunslinger may be an enigma to many of the new gamers. Hell, even me to an extent. I was playing on Xbox at the time. I didn't even play on PC until 2015. I know, I'm a fraud. When I did finally get access to a shitty laptop that was half my age already, if not older, and it ran at like 20 FPS. Yeah, that thing was awful. The thing was really old. Then I finally got to play on PC, but whatever. Enough about that. Let's talk about the original Gunslinger. To get this out of the way, the blue and red text is identical with the 25 extra health and the 3-hit combo system, but no random critical hits. What changed were the mini-sentries, which had a few small differences. First, let's talk about the negatives of the original mini-sentries just to warm us up. 1. It couldn't be wrench boosted to increase the speed in which it deploys, and it couldn't be repaired. The gunslinger could repair other sentries of other engineers, but the mini-sentry itself was unable to be repaired, so you would have to place it down, wait for it to eventually die, and then you would be allowed to place another one. You couldn't keep just one mini-sentry alive, similar to kind of how the disposable sentry works in Man vs. Machine. But the OG Mini was much better than that thing. I wouldn't dare compare the two in terms of efficiency. I think you get it. Also, don't buy the disposable mini-sentry. It's pretty much useless. I mean, unless it's Wave 7. Please, Man vs. Machine players, I don't recommend that you buy that. Get dispenser range and get two-way teleporters. Thank you. There really only were 3 bonuses to the original, but because of how pestering they could be, I have to consider that the Gunslinger is kind of a glow-up. First, while you couldn't wrench boost or repair the mini-sentry, it did build significantly faster. It was a tad slower than if you were to wrench boost the current mini-sentry, but it was wicked fast. It could be placed, you could run and get out of dodge, with the sentry gun firing in the blink of an eye. 2, the sentry started construction at 100% health, which meant that it was often very difficult to destroy before the sentry was up and shooting. And if you did destroy it, the engineer could just very quickly place another one, and without wrench boosting it, they could start shooting at you alongside the sentry. For an aggressive engineer, this made the Mini wildly effective. And to wrap this all up, the Mini Sentry, while the scrap can be picked up to replenish ammo nowadays, originally could replenish metal as well. So you could keep picking up scrap and possibly get enough for a third. Maybe. But either way, it got you a lot closer. This is where we start tapering off, and the glow-ups aren't as big. I would say if you're an aggressive engineer, which you likely are if you're running this thing over the stock wrench or jag or Eureka effect if you're a Chad, as those are meant for more defensive or slightly offensive roles. An argument can be made for the jag, but the jag is more about setting up quick bases than pestering the team with sentry guns. The Gunslinger was better at this back in the day than it is currently, but don't get me wrong, the Gunslinger and more so the Mini Sentry are still very strong weapons, even now, and I don't think anybody would say it's bad. But in my personal opinion, I have to say that the original Gunslinger was just a little bit better, so the current one is a slight glow down. Most people probably don't even know this weapon had any changes whatsoever. Here I have the first Scout primary, which was solidified as the Skunk primary of choice from its debut, the Force of Nature.
You knuckleheads ain't even worth the F.
Yep, I'm sure a good bit of you were surprised to hear that this weapon has had a glow down, and I mean, kind of. Unlike some other ones on this list, it isn't 100%, and some people may disagree. The average Joe would probably call it a glow up, in all honesty, but someone who used this weapon for more than like 20 minutes and got acquainted with the original version, yeah, the OG takes the cake. A good player can absolutely just dominate with the original Force of Nature. Let's go over the current stats first, as we have with all weapons thus far. The Force of Nature is a double-barreled shotgun that knocks both you and players back with the first shell, dealing knockback to enemies, which in some cases can launch them across the map, assuming you're in close proximity, and do at least 40 damage. This extra knockback will allow you to perform a pseudo triple jump by aiming at a slight angle. In addition, it comes with a 50% faster firing speed, 2 extra pellets per shot, but it comes with the drawbacks of only having 2 shells. Obviously, it would be weird if a 2-barreled weapon were to hold more than 2 shots, right? Yeah. And a 10% damage penalty, which means that each pellet does less damage, but if you land all 12, opposed to the default 10, you'll deal a max of 113. Then there's the hidden downside of discarding 2 shells, regardless if you fired both or just 1 barrel. It will remove 2 from reserve. I kind of talked about that earlier. The modern Force of Nature, for all intents and purposes, is more memey, less effective scattergun that launches people out of your effective range, unless there's a proper wall directly behind them. Despite this doesn't stop it from being my second favorite scattergun behind the shortstop. Don't king shame me. It is a very fun weapon to use. It can be really effective as it does very high burst damage, there's no denying that, but it didn't always work the way it does now, and that's what we're about to go over. First, the firing speed, 50%, 20% pellets per shot, and the 66% ammo penalty. It's the exact same as it is today. Well, actually, it was listed at 60% as a 60% clip size penalty, but this was just visual. It still held to. No more than cool trivia. Other than these two stats, everything else works slightly differently. First, the knockback. Yes, the knockback wasn't always like it is today. When the weapon first dropped, both shots used to deal knockback to enemies. This may not sound too different because in modern day, the knockback from the shotgun is likely to push them out of range, but the original Force of Nature had a far more muted knockback, akin to like air blast. This made it possible to juggle enemies in the air, stun locking them with their only way of escaping being hoping that you either beef your shot, or that they can hide behind something while you're reloading since it took a full minute to reload this thing. On top of this, the knockback didn't have a damage requirement nor a range requirement like it does now, so it could mess with people at greater distances and with less damage. Something a bit more neutral is that regardless if you were to aim the Force of Nature at the ground or whatever, it would always send you in a fixed path rather than the direction you use it. This made it easier for newer players, but it could possibly screw over a scout if they weren't careful using it, especially in the middle of a firefight. Now it's a little bit more predictable, so it's harder to use, it's harder to get the jump right, but you can actually jump a little bit higher and it's just more under your control. There was actually one downside compared to today, and that's the Force of Nature used to have a 20% damage penalty instead of a 10% damage penalty. So the max damage was 101 instead of 113. Despite this, a good player was far more dangerous with the Force of Nature then than they are now, as like I said, it stun locked enemies, it didn't push them out of effective range, so it was a lot easier to kind of just two-tap them. Sure, a bad player may actually get more use out of the current Force of Nature, assuming they could hit the first shot and not the second, though if you spent any time with the Force of Nature, the original one will be far more of an actual threat, rather than a lime green scout's wet dream. Still, solid weapon overall, like I said, second favorite scattergun of all time, but it was a bit of a glow down. Alright, here we have a nice short and sweet one. This one is incontestable and it is in fact a sure glow down. You cannot deny it, you cannot refute it. But because it's rather small and it's on a secondary weapon, doesn't rank higher, I'm talking about the gunboats.
Screaming Eagles!
I'm not gonna lie, I forgot the gunboats were introduced in Soldier's first weapon cache. It completely slipped my mind and I had to write this later. Personally, I haven't used them in a very long time. I think it's been like a year and a half. The last time I consistently used the gunboats was probably 5 years ago. And the last time I used the gunboats in general was that video that I made back in January 2024. And I got that footage in like November 2023, so it's been a long time. I doubt you care about my personal experience. You want me to explain how the gunboats downgraded. First, the current and only stat of the gunboats, besides the obvious inability to use shotguns or banners, is that it gives you a 60% blast resistance from your own rockets. This allows you to rocket jump far more often, without needing to use the jumper or sacrifice damage using something like the Liberty Launcher, as I know a lot of you don't like Liberty Launcher. Though, when those two are paired together, they are one hell of a combo. I believe it brings it down to like 12 damage per rocket jump. It's kind of insane. Though, if we had the original gunboats, that combo would be even better. The gunboats have had only one change, and that's that the original blast resistance was not 60%, but rather 75%, allowing you to rocket jump a little bit more freely, doing a little bit less damage to yourself. I mean, either way, the gunboats are still really good. It's a staple for those who like mobility. I know this despite not running them on my own loadouts consistently. I have a hard time considering them much of a glow down, as the difference is just 15% on a secondary that is still rather good, but it is a glow down for sure. I couldn't put it any lower. We are starting to encroach on true glow-up territory, but we have a few more we have to go through first. We have a weapon that, okay, I know what I want to say, but I don't know how to put this. Let's see. I personally have a lot of interest in the contrast between modern-day Team Fortress 2 and Team Fortress 2 from years ago, obviously, otherwise this video just wouldn't exist. However, there are a lot of people like me, more specifically with weapon stat history. The weapon we're going over right now is like the painted cow mangler of interesting facts. Most people who show any interest in the past of this game will know this weapon and the differences between when it was released and current day. It's like one of those entry-level fun facts, I guess you could say. It's the Blitzauger.
The healing is not as rewarding as the hurting.
I'm sure a lot of light bulbs just went off in some of your heads. The Blitzauger in modern day is pretty simple, and it's not too bad of a weapon in all honesty. Sure, yeah, when you compare it to the modern day Crusader's crossbow, it's meh, but on its own it's fine. Plus 3 health on hit for the downside of minus 2 health on wear, which reduces the max health gain per second from 3 to 6 down to just 1 to 4. As you likely already know, the original Blitzauger was a little bit better than the modern one today, simply because the downside was not as harsh. It still had the plus 3 health on hit that hasn't changed, but instead of minus 2 health on wearer, the only downside is, say it with me, no random critical hits. Good job, friend. Yes, I know, stupid downside for a decent upside. This was TF2 in 2008, the balancing was weird, and it was like this for a little while. Though, a bit of a fun fact, this technically isn't even much of a downside, the newer version isn't, because Medic's base health regen used to be half of what it is today, ranging from 1 to 3 instead of 3 to 6, so that 1 to 4 is actually an improvement. However, we're comparing the weapon within their environments, so it would be unfair to say the Blitzauger had a glow-up, when in reality it was Medic himself who had the glow-up, not the Blitzauger, whatever. There's that. Next weapon. I actually didn't even include this item until last minute because I forgot it technically had a change at all. I'm gonna go fast through this one. We have the Uber Saw.
Did that sting?
Sorry!
25 Uber on a successful hit for the downside of a 20% slower swing speed. The penultimate medic melee. If you see a medic without this melee, they have officially escaped the Matrix, because rarely anyone does not run this item. The Uber Saw has had no real stat changes, at least visible stat changes, but it has had 2 small changes, so I have to technically include it. For the downside side of things, spicing things up a little bit, the Uber Saw on release lacked the Spinal Tap taunt and couldn't taunt kill. It used the default taunt and has the current Viola sound that the Vita Saw uses currently, but that was originally for the Uber Saw. I'm sure you've all seen this video before. The only reason I'm even considering this a glowdown is because it used to gain Uber on disguised spies, which happens a lot more frequently than taunt kills in my opinion, which only gave 50% Uber originally, by the way, the more you know. Though, because of the small change that does present itself once in a while, I have to say it's technically a glowdown, but only by a little bit. This last one was such a small change that I thought about not even including it, though it technically was a glowdown, so I have to. The last weapon to lack a glow-up, but instead regress, is the Frontier of Justice.
Woo-wee! Will you look at that?
The Frontier Justice. You gain 2 revenge crits for every kill your sentry gets, or 1 for every assist. A revenge crit is given when your sentry is destroyed. As for the drawbacks, the weapon cannot randomly crit, has a 50% 2 mag size penalty, only having 3 instead of 6, and the revenge crits are lost on death. They do not carry over. Some of you are likely surprised to even see this item on the list, but like I stated already, the reason is very small, and I thought about just glossing it over. You see, there is now a max to how many crits can be stored. That number is 35. So what changed? Well, on release, there wasn't a cap. That's it. So if you managed to get 17.5 plus kills with your sentry gun, you could get more than 35 revenge crits. Other than that, and some small little fixes, like I believe the Frontier Justice used to share the stock shotgun sound effect and stuff like that. Other than that, it is the exact same as it is today. That's why I kept this segment short, just like Engineer. Well, I don't have one weapon for this slot because this is actually the midway point. Yes, you made it. You made it past the glowdowns. Here I have 2 weapons for what you can call the neutral slot or the maintenance spot. The Killing Gloves of Boxing and the Southern Hospitality. These 2 weapons work the same as they did back on release in 2008 and 2010 respectively. Neither of these have had any significant changes from release. The Southern Hospitality did get a 25% damage penalty back when the Hatless update came out, but that was reverted the next day alongside all the other weapons that were changed. Might as well not dwell on this for too long. It's time for the real glow-ups. We had a really good flow going, but unfortunately we have just hit a brick wall. No more 2-minute segments for a little while. Depending on your playstyle, this one may be a weapon that people consider a glow down rather than glow up, but I'll try my best to explain why I believe this is not the case. This one also has a bit of extra difficulty added on due to major changes in mechanics of this item over time. I'm sure that gave it away for some of you. It's the backburner. The backburner, in my opinion, is a quite underutilized flamethrower, but this is not a video going over my opinion on the weapon itself, but comparing it to its original version. If you know the backburner history already, which there is a good chance, this is sort of one of those weapons that gets talked about a lot, especially its original version, you either immediately disagreed with me or you immediately agreed with me. The backburner currently has 2 stats and 1 hidden stat. The ability to crit from behind, that is the main gimmick of the weapon. It's about a 73-degree window, give or take about 1 to 2 degrees. The hitbox is a little bit weird. And it comes at the downside of Air Blast costing 150% more, which is 50 instead of 20. And it also cannot randomly crit, which has been left off the weapon card since 2008. I don't know why it's not there. That is how it is today, but here's the hard part. The original backburner was around during just a different time in the TF2 landscape. So things weren't exactly 1-to-1. Let's go over the stats first. It had 3 stats, and then it had, like I said, the no random crit stat that was once again left off the weapon card. It has never been on there for some reason, but the backburner cannot randomly crit. The listed stats were, first, it crits from behind. That's the exact same. I think there's some slight differences, but overall it's pretty much the same. Though after that, everything else changes. The original backburner, I'm sure you heard this before, also sported a 50 max health bonus, which increased Pyro's health to 225 at base, which allowed his overheal to go up to 335, and this came at the downside of no air blast rather than increased air blast cost, which is funny to me because air blast was introduced in the same update that the backburner was added in the first place. Yes, I think I said it already, Pyro lacked air blast when the game first came out, but I'm sure most of you knew that already, even without me telling you. This is where things become extremely difficult. First, fire used to work very differently. If you played before Jungle Inferno, you probably know this already. Instead of Afterburn ranging from 4 to 10 seconds based on exposure, dealing 4 damage per tick, Afterburn always lasted 10 seconds, except for a short time where it lasted 6, and did 3 damage per tick. Flames also couldn't bounce off walls. They were a little bit more transparent, just a tad, and they were more of a fiery yellow, as well as damage ramp up being significantly worse. Not as bad as it was back in 2007, where I think it fell off to like 25% damage. It was stupid. Not that bad, but it was still a little bit worse than it is today. It's time for me to make a decision, and I'm a bit split on this one for a major reason. My answer would be different based on the era of the game. That's right. In the modern era, because Air Blast is so integral and players are generally better at the game, I mean the game's almost 18 years old, the modern backburner, despite the air blast costs, would be more effective because you can still stuff Ubers, reflect the odd projectile, push people around, etc. However, I honestly think that had it been 2008 TF2, my answer would be different for multiple reasons. 50 extra health is a lot even today, but back then, due to the lower average skill of players, that was even bigger. Plus, Air Blast was new, so basically this flamethrower was the original flamethrower, but with 50 more health and the ability to crit from behind. It doesn't stop there either. The original Air Blast was far worse than it is today. Sure, it could lock people midair, and Air Blast would always predictably push people, but other than that, it wasn't very good. It costed 25 instead of 20, the delay between compression blasts was 25% longer, it didn't mini crit boost projectiles, it could occasionally push friendly Demo Man grenades, it couldn't extinguish teammates when it first came out. There was just a lot of little things where it wasn't as good. So if we're comparing the weapons back then, like if we took the current backburner and compared it to the original backburner back in 2008, the original one would probably win. But because we're looking at it in a modern sense, if you were to take the 2008 version and bring it to 2025 or beyond, I think the Backburner has overall had a bit of a glow up, especially when factoring in new mechanics and the average skill of current players. This one is a tough one for sure, I can't lie to you, but unfortunately, this isn't the only one that was tough. Prepare yourself for the next one. Shouldn't be as bad though. Like I stated already, we have two tough ones back to back, but this one's a little less divisive overall. This one isn't very clear for a multitude of reasons, and it's kind of hard for me to quantify because I wasn't even playing TF2 at the time the original version existed. I wouldn't play for another about 2 years, and that was on Xbox. So I could be easily overestimating or underestimating the effectiveness of this weapon. So I put it quite close to neutral, but I think it's slightly better overall now than it was on release. If we got any veterans in the chat, let me know if I'm right or if I'm wrong. Once again, I could be off base with this one. It's the buff banner.
Sound off like you've got a horn!
The buff banner is the only soldier banner without a passive upside, with the battalion's backup and contra having a 20 health bonus and +1 to 4 per tick health regen thing respectively. Despite this, the buff banner is a solid defensive but more so offensive banner to run, especially with the weapon it was intended to be paired with being the direct hit. Dealing 600 damage will allow you to blow this horn, which gives you and anyone in a 450 hammer unit radius mini-crits for a full 10 seconds. You can also hold the banner. If you start the animation, but you just hold down mouse 1, you can hold it until you're ready to go. Very simple and sweet item, but now we must discuss the original version of the buff banner, which had two differences compared to modern day. First, it used to last 14 seconds rather than 10. That's right, you got an extra 4 seconds of mini crits that you could use and give to your teammates. However, while this sounds nice, 14 seconds, it also required 1,000 damage to fill rather than just 600. So it took significantly longer to fill, but you had an additional 4 seconds of mini crits. This one certainly depends on how good or bad you are as a player, though in my opinion it already takes a decent amount of time to fill up the 600 damage requirement. 1,000 is kind of crazy unless you're playing like a wuss or you're just popping off. The extra 4 seconds is nice, but I would rather have these slightly shorter durations more often, as I feel like those 4 extra seconds are going to get wasted more often than not, and you'll just not have it nearly as often. Maybe I'm wrong, it depends on the person, but I overall believe that the buff banner has had a slight glow up rather than a glow down. Let me know what you think about this one. Oh boy, this is one of the most interesting items to be added to TF2, that's for sure. I mean, whatever they were smoking back in the office in 09, I want some of it. I'm talking about Sniper's interesting form of self-defense. Jar-based karate, aka Girardi.
Girardi! Bombs away!
Girardi, why does this exist? Seriously, this is bizarre even for 2009 TF2 standards, but I'm not here to judge motives. Maybe I can make an hour-long video about that in the future. The Girardi, as I stated already, was introduced as part of the Sniper vs. Spy update on May 21st, 2009, and this was one of the weapons that first displayed mini crits as a feature, which were not always a thing of the game. But one day, Sniper pissed in a jar, threw it at a Frenchman, and every merc slept a little bit worse from that point onward. The Girardi is a throwable secondary that coats enemies in a liquid that tints their vision yellow. The radius is about 200 hammer units, which is significantly larger than Soldier's rockets, which have a radius of about 146 for reference, and will soak enemies for 10 seconds, taking 20 seconds to recharge. Unless you throw it at a burning teammate, which, if you extinguish them, will reduce the recharge time from 20 seconds to 16 seconds, or 20% as it's listed on the weapon card. During this time, they'll take mini crit damage, which means all damage done to them has their fall off negated, and it does 35% more damage on top of that. There is still damage ramp up though. They're also considered wet, so the Neon Annihilator will crit, but this also means that Girardi can be washed off by jumping into bodies of water like the pit on 2 Fort or the waterfall in Powerhouse. Some may not have known that, it took me a bit to notice, but jumping into water will wash Girardi off. Or touching a resupply cabinet, that goes without saying. The Girardi is a very strong weapon for sure, and is absolutely infuriating when combined with the Bushwhacker, a spy's worst nightmare for sure. But anyway, as I'm sure you figured out, the Girardi has had a glow up in recent years. What could it be? Maybe the radius has increased? Maybe it could be thrown a little bit further. Maybe it did originally soak enemies for 10 seconds. Nope, it has 3 differences. 2 positives, 1 negative, kind of. It originally didn't reduce your recharge if you extinguished a burning teammate. Teammates could also block your Girardi at close range, whereas now this only happens if they are on fire, or if they're at the same range where a rocket would behave similarly. But the only drawback now, compared to then, is that it no longer causes self-inflicted mini-crits, which messed up soldiers' rocket jumps and Demo's sticky pill jumps sometimes. And I suppose Pyro's detonator jumps, but it didn't exist at the time, so those 2 for sure. Yeah, it may have been nice to make 2 of the 9 classes day a little bit crappier. Not literally, I suppose. Overall, it's ever so slightly better now than it was before. If it weren't for the backburner and battalion's backup being so incredibly hard to rank properly, this weapon would probably be at the very bottom of actual glow-ups on the totem pole. But regardless, let's keep the train moving along. We got a rather mild one here, another sniper versus spy weapon, which was part of the same set. This one is certainly a glow-up, pretty much no matter how you slice it, so we have our pretty much first incontestable glow-up of the video. Give it a round of applause. The weapon I'm talking about is a classic, not literally, but is one of my personal all-time favorites. I main this weapon whenever I play this class. Enough stalling, it's the Huntsman.
If your strategy is to build me confidence, it's working.
The Huntsman, the Lucksman, however you choose to refer to this weapon, is one of my all-time favorites because while there is certainly a luck component to this item, I can't lie to you, it is refreshing to find a Huntsman sniper because 99% of the time, unless you get unlucky and they get a cross map or something, you are engaged directly with the sniper and can actually see the projectile coming at you instead of him being 3,000 hammer units away where you didn't even see him. I love it. Anyway, you know the drill, the Huntsman doesn't have any actual stats, but I'm sure you've noticed this is not a sniper rifle. It functions quite differently, so I'll go over the major information you need to know. The Huntsman fires a projectile at 1,800 hammer units when uncharged, or 2,600 hammer units when at 100% charge. It uses a bounding box rather than the typical hit-scan hitbox. When it hits a player, the game will effectively teleport the arrow to its closest point on the player's actual hitbox. This is how it figures out headshots and why subclasses are easier to headshot than others, and why some headshots feel like BS. The arrow seems like it should go right by his head, but instead it does not. The Huntsman obviously cannot scope, so you have to charge by holding mouse 1 and can release the arrow by either firing or pressing mouse 2 to lower the bow without expending a shot. It takes 1 second to charge rather than 3.3, and you move at 53% movement speed rather than 27. For reference, Sniper moves at 100% movement speed or 300 hammer units. You cannot jump while the bow is back, but you can shoot while jumping. The arrow can be lit on fire by pyros in certain props on some maps, such as the Group Keep, allowing it to do afterburn damage. The ramp up for bows is also lower, so the max damage of a fully charged body shot is 120 or 360 with a critical hit. The Huntsman has only 13 arrows, despite claiming to have 18 on the update page, what the hell, Valve, rather than 25 that the stock sniper rifle and all the other sniper rifles have. Finally, the Huntsman has a taunt kill, which stuns the enemy first and then does 500 damage. That is a lot of information. I kind of went fast, but hopefully at least one thing in there was new info to you, because that was quite an essay. Despite this, I have good news. As you already know, the Huntsman has had a glow-up. So how did the original Huntsman compare? Well, it was pretty much the same. I know, underwhelming. But it did have some small differences. I'm not going to talk about every difference, but there were a few that I can go over here. First, the Huntsman defaulted to left hand rather than being right-handed. I'm sure a handful of you already have heard this before, but the Huntsman was originally left-handed by default. Not 100% sure why this is. Maybe testing flip view models. I have no idea. The Huntsman initially could not be fired or even charged midair, to my understanding, so there was no opportunity for hitting those sick 360s, literally no scopes. And finally, for the biggest stuff, Huntsman had to be aimed in order to be lit on fire, whether that be by props onto Group Keep or by Pyro's flamethrowers. And I guess you could throw this in for a bit of fun, the Righteous Bison. Well, not day one because the Bison didn't exist yet, but this did work with the whole Huntsman in general. Back in the day, the Righteous Bison could ignite arrows. Don't try this now, it doesn't work, and I'm very sad, since they changed the projectiles in the Jungle Inferno update. So there you have it. This one is a pretty straightforward win. The Huntsman, while not leagues ahead of the original, is an improvement unless you consider being left-handed by default and overpowered upside. Sniper is doing good so far. Here's a fun one, an iconic TF2 weapon, maybe not iconic enough to be recognized outside of TF2 like the golden frying pan, but if you played for more than 20 minutes, you know what this weapon is. It's basically its own character at this point, and it literally is its own character in the comics. We're talking about the Eyelander. The Eyelander was the first Demo Man sword unlock added to the game, also in the War Update of 2009, and it kind of shows. Seeing as this weapon is one of those infamous snowball weapons that doesn't really have much of a downside after X amount of kills or damage or whatever. It was a pioneer of this. The Eyelander starts you off with 25 less health, bringing base Demo Man from 175 to 150, or if you're rocking the Alibaba Wee Booties, or the Bootlegger if you're a real one, 200 to 175. Every kill will give you a head, and with this, 1, your base health will be increased by 15. This can be done 4 times in increments of 15, so with no booties it goes 150, 165, 180, 195, 210. With the booties it's 175, 190, 205, 220, and maxes out at 235. And that is the complete max. Getting kills after this will give you 15 health on kill. Imagine if it didn't have a cap. Yeah, that'd be fun. It also increases your movement speed, which also caps out at 128% with 5 heads if you don't have the booties, or 136% with the booties and Bootlegger. 136% is just a tad faster than Scout at base, who's at 133%. And finally, it will increase shield bash damage by 10 up to 50. Being a sword, it also comes with a 50% increased melee range, but deploys and holsters 75% slower and cannot randomly crit. Wow, that was a lot of stuff to go over, but necessary. The Eyelander is the quintessential Demo Knight weapon, and without this weapon, we don't have a true Demo Knight. Sure, there's the Persian Persuader, which tried to be that weapon, but it's not the Eyelander. As you've likely noticed, I said that this weapon has had a slight glow up. Is that true? Actually, it depends. Here's why. Some of the stat changes favor Demo Knight, which is how the vast majority of people use the Eyelander, and some favored Hybrid Knight, or regular Demo Man, which is a little bit less common. Though, let's break it down. The Eyelander is mostly the same as it was in 2009. The head system was the same in terms of speed gain and health gain. There were no booties, but I'm not going to hold that against the Eyelander. The eye glow used to also be reddish for the red team and blue for the blue team rather than green, so it's slightly harder to see. It couldn't random crit, and it started you off with 150 health, though there were 3 differences. Well, 4, kind of. First, there's the universal change to all swords, increased holsters time and whatnot, and the increased melee range, but I'm not holding that against the Eyelander in this case. The first difference, gaining heads used to not increase shield bash damage, which would suck a lot for Demo Knight, but it's also because the charge didn't even deal shield bash damage on release. Despite this is still technically a drawback that I will hold against the Eyelander. But that is the only clear downside. The other one is less so. You remember how I stated that since it's a sword, it gains increased melee range and decreased deploy and holster speed? Well, that wasn't always a thing. In the Tough Break update of December 2015, all swords were given universal stats. If you're an avid Demo Man player that uses the Eyelander, 1, you're unique, and 2, the extra range might be nice, but it's less reliable to whip out in a pinch. If you're a Hybrid Knight player, it's a little less of an issue, since most people play Hybrid Knight in 2 distinct flow states. For Demo Knights, which is the primary users of the Eyelander, it is a straight upgrade as you cannot holster your Eyelander, period. So it's just an additional melee range with no strings attached. All things considered, I believe the Eyelander is a slight glow up, though feel free to argue this one. That's why it's not very high up on this list. I think the benefits outweigh the cons more than the weapons prior, but not everyone may agree. I have an underrated weapon in this slot. It's another weapon that was a bit difficult, but I think it's better at doing its job nowadays. It's one of the most front-loaded TF2 weapons in the game, the Scottish Resistance.
You appear to have trodden on a mine!
The Scottish Resistance was added in the War Update alongside the Eyelander and Charging Charge. Yeah, there was no Demo Man primary introduced in the War Update. It wouldn't be until later in 2010 that the Lock and Load would be added to the game. But let's talk about the stats of the Scottish Resistance. You are able to place up to 14 stickies rather than the standard 8, and you can detonate the stickies one at a time. You basically have this invisible circle on your screen that whenever you hover over your sticky bombs, it can allow you to detonate them individually, unless you're too far away or if the bombs are too clumped up, then I guess it's impossible to just detonate one at a time, but you get what I mean. This makes it solid for setting up multiple traps, the go-to defensive sticky bomb launcher. It also has a 25% faster firing speed, which can allow you to carpet bomb an entire area or set up traps faster. It also has a 50% max reserve ammo bonus, bringing the base 24 that the sticky bomb launcher has up to 36. You can detonate stickies while on top of them. This is less of an upside and more of a quality of life addition, allowing you to sticky jump with this thing without having to awkwardly look down first. Finally, you have the last upside, which allows you to destroy enemy sticky bombs. It can come in super handy for destroying sticky traps rather than kind of dispersing the bombs. The downside for the plethora of amazing upsides is a 0.8 second longer arm time, meaning it takes a second and a half instead of 0.7 seconds to detonate. There are no other downsides on this weapon, it's just worse at sticky spamming, which is debatable to be honest with you, mainly due to that extra firing speed. The current Scottish resistance is misunderstood, terribly underrated for the damage it can inflict. You can set multiple traps in different doorways, and like I said previously, you can carpet bomb entire areas to keep enemies on their toes. But enough about that, how does it compare to the original Scottish resistance? Well, everything is the exact same except for two stats. Originally, the Scottish resistance lacked the 25% faster firing speed when the weapon was first launched. This means it took the standard 0.6 seconds instead of 0.45 seconds to fire each individual bomb. Though, instead of a 0.8 second arm time penalty like it has today, it was only 0.4 seconds, meaning it took 1.1 seconds to arm instead of the modern day 1.5. You can also take into account that the original sticky bombs had the explosion radius of 159 hammer units instead of 146, though that's only about 9%. There were some bug fixes here and there, but these are the only significant changes of the Scottish resistance from its original version back in the war update. There are benefits to both of these, but that 25% firing speed just allows you to litter the field with bombs, as well as allowing you to place traps much quicker and more efficiently. Though it does have a smaller explosion radius and does take 0.4 seconds longer to detonate, because this weapon is mostly defensive orientated and excels at setting traps, the modern day version is a little bit superior. You can argue this one for sure, I understand, but I personally think the ability to vomit bombs is better than being able to detonate 0.4 of a second faster on a weapon that's mainly meant for trapping anyway. Next one is a little bit less of a contest. Got a real nasty piece of work right here. I do not like this weapon, and I felt dirty getting footage for it. No, it's not the Phlogiston, Short Circuit, Vaccinator, or any sniper rifle except the classic, and in my opinion, the Sydney Sleeper. I love the Sydney Sleeper. This weapon pisses in the cereal of any class that has mobility. We're talking about the Natasha.
Oh, run! Run! I'm coming for you!
Seriously, I do not like the Natasha. I wouldn't say I hate it, but I do not like this thing. Just an annoying weapon to fight against, and not all that great, which is why personally I don't use it very often. It's still a minigun, don't get me wrong. The damage is unbelievably high, which is kind of why I hate it. But it's not because it's overpowered. It's because it takes very little skill to use, and it's just a pain in the ass to fight against. Even if you know the strafe method, you can strafe back and forth and kind of negate it. If there's people around, or you're not thinking about it at the time, or you're in the heat of a battle, or it's just you can't think fast enough, it sucks, especially at closer to mid-range. Tantrum over, the Natasha works like this. It slows enemies down to 113 hammer units, regardless of class, which is why it sucks, especially as Scout, and it's not as bad at Heavy, briefly for each shot that hits them. For reference, Heavy while spun up moves at 110 hammer units in modern day. The effectiveness does begin to taper off at greater distances, so there's that at least. It doesn't snipe you, but it sucks if you're at any reasonable range. It also comes with the upside of a 20% damage resistance while spun up to all incoming damage as long as you are either below 50% health or the damage would put you below 50% health. The damage resistance does allow you to survive 3 pills, 3 scattergun blasts, and 2 headshots, so it isn't completely useless. The downsides include a 25% damage penalty and a 30% slower spin-up time, so it takes a little over a second instead of 0.87 seconds. I also should mention this because I'm not going over any more miniguns in the video. All miniguns have a universal 1 second damage and accuracy ramp up that is lost once you unrev. As long as you are revved for at least 1 second, you will do normal damage and you'll have your normal accuracy. The Natasha, like I said, isn't a terrible weapon. Terrible design, sure. Terrible as in ineffective? Absolutely not. It's still a minigun at the end of the day, but it used to be a lot worse than it is now. The Natasha has actually had quite a few changes. I was a little bit surprised to learn this like a year or two ago, but still. Some may remember when the Natasha had 300 rounds rather than 200, but this was not a stat on release. In fact, it was just a 2-stat weapon when it first came out. It looked like this. 100% chance to slow down on hit for 25% less damage done. Also, yes, that is how they used to write it. Instead of a damage penalty, it was damage done. I don't know. I think it's fine written that way. So we can see right away that it lacked the 30% slower spin-up speed and the 20% damage resistance while below 50% health, or if the damage was to put you below 50% health. If we look at this at face value, you may say that it might have actually been better back then because of the faster spin-up. Though I'm sure because this weapon is so high up on the GLOWUP scale, it must not be the case. And that is correct. First, we have to discuss the Universal Heavy Minigun changes. This is very important. The one that would least impact my judgment is the damage penalty versus sentry guns. Level 2 sentries used to have a 20% damage resistance, and level 3s used to have a 33% damage resistance to heavies miniguns. Now it's 15% and 20% respectively. Spin-up speed used to be 25% slower by default, so the difference wasn't very big between modern day and the original. And finally, for the downsides of all miniguns, heavies used to move at 80% while revved up instead of 110, which is why I said it's 110 hammer units in modern day. For reference, sniper moves at 80 hammer units while scoped in. The one benefit of the old miniguns is it used to lack the accuracy and damage ramp up downside, though even that can't save it because there's one final difference, and this actually has to do with the Natasha itself. Despite stating it has a 25% damage penalty, it actually has a 33% damage penalty in practice, and the strength of the slowdown was much less consistent and much weaker. This wouldn't be addressed for a while, but this was actually the case, so the Natasha just wasn't as advertised, I guess. Overall, the current Natasha is superior to the original one for many reasons. Don't get me wrong though, it was still a minigun and could put in the work, but it was worse at its job. I kinda wish it was still that way. Had it been prior to October 20th, 2017, aka the Jungle Inferno update, we would have an absolute layup. But because it's not, and that was back when dinosaurs were still roaming the earth, some more thought had to go into it. But not much. Despite being a GLOWUP, we have possibly one of the worst designed weapons, the worst designed weapon in the game, even more than the last one, and most people would agree with me. I don't think I've used this item outside of getting footage since probably 2016, hell, maybe even 2015. We already talked about the Dead Ringer, and the Short Circuit and Vaccinator weren't original unlocks, so that just leaves...
Backstab that, you snake!
Disgusting. I am not a fan of the Razorback. I wouldn't say I have as much of a disdain for it as some people do, but it's just a boring, unfun, single-class counter and nothing else. It only protects you from spies and specifically backstabs and has no other function other than that. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. This was 2009 TF2. The Extinguisher, Original Equalizer, and Original Sandman were in existence around this time. They're all 2009 weapons except for the Extinguisher, which was introduced in June 2008, but even so, that's around the same general time frame. And the Natasha. The Razorback has 2 stats and only 2 stats. It has the ability to block one single backstab, just one. Sure, it has a 30-second recharge, but even so, it effectively blocks one backstab, and that's all, in which it stuns the spy for 2 seconds. Not like a Sandman stun, just making it so he can't attack, cloak, or switch weapons for 2 seconds. But even so, most spies in today's day and age understand that you can't stab the Razorback, so it's even more pointless. It also has the downside of 100% overheal penalty. This didn't make sense to me for a very long time, because I was thinking, this is Sniper for crying out loud, why does it matter? But I finally heard someone give a theory or just explain why it most likely exists, and it makes sense. It's so you can't survive both a backstab and a quickscope headshot at the same time. We know how some snipers can shut down entire parts of the map, and if they have a little pocket medic boyfriend on Two Ford or Harvest or any of the maps with long sightlines, it means he can be completely resistant to both backstabs and headshots. So he has to be susceptible to at least one now. Makes sense. Regardless of reasoning, the current Razorback is unfortunately better now than it was back in 2009. First, it didn't have a recharge, so it was legitimately one use until you touched a resupply cabinet. It was like this until 2017. Though what some may not know is that the Razorback did in fact have a downside on release. It wasn't the 100% overheal penalty, so a good sniper could still theoretically lock stuff down if they had a pocket medic up their ass, but in my opinion, it was a bit worse for the average or even really good player. And this is what a lot of people do not know. Most people just remember the version we had for, 6 years, 7 years or so, where it just blocked one backstab and that was the only stat. No, originally it came with a 15% movement speed penalty, making him slower than Demoman, which would make each trek to the battlefield a slogfest. Hope you weren't playing 5 CP. It also didn't lock spies to holding the knife out, which meant they couldn't re-stab, but they could pull out the revolver if they remember to have one in the first place and just kill you that way, especially with the new ambassador. Well, maybe not on day one, a little bit of foreshadowing. The Razorback has unfortunately had a glow up, at least in 99% of cases. This one shouldn't be too long. It is an equipment type item for the class that has had the biggest glowdown in TF2. Not literally, he's actually had a lot of buffs since launch, but you know what I mean. The item I'm referring to in the class I'm throwing shade at is the Cloak and Dagger for Spy.
Sorry to pop in unannounced.
The Cloak and Dagger was released alongside the Deadringer. We got both watches in the first Spy update, Sniper vs. Spy update, and have received none since then. It is meant to be the more sneaky, stealthy, and low-key option. The Deadringer is aggressive, the Cloak and Dagger is stealthy, and the stock Invis watch is kinda somewhere in between. The Cloak and Dagger, rather than using a traditional time-based cloak drain, is instead based on your movement. It lasts somewhere around 6.5 seconds if you run at full speed, which is significantly shorter than the 10 seconds of the Invis watch and even 7 of the Deadringer. But like I said, it is based on movement and movement speed. Running backwards gives you about 7.5 seconds, swimming gives you 10.5 seconds, and finally crouching and shuffling slowly gives you nearly 59 seconds, almost a full minute of invisibility. 82 if you're using the Electron J, and then a little bit less if you're using the Your Eternal Reward. Falling also does reduce cloak, gotta be careful about that, and so does getting flung or whatever. Basically any movement whatsoever, but it is capped to the Spy's movement speed, so it's not like if you fall at Mach 10, you'll lose cloak instantly. It does have a cap. It also has a 100% cloak regen speed when uncloaked, 15 seconds instead of 30. You receive no ammo from boxes while cloaked. I'm talking about the actual cloak meter. I'm not talking about your revolver. But it will receive cloak meter, ammo, whatever, from boxes while uncloaked, but just at a 35% reduced rate. The Cloak and Dagger is one of my favorite watches, mainly because I kind of suck at Spy, but also because I just love waiting for the right time to pick. I find that stuff engaging for whatever reason. I know a lot of people like to go kind of ham with Spy and run the kunai and all that stuff, but sometimes I just like to kind of pester engineers and sneak behind the enemy lines to pick off the random medic or snipe their teleporter. It's a very fun weapon. The Cloak and Dagger has had a small but noticeable glow up in the recent years. Let's look at the weapon card. Oh yeah, a lot of old weapon cards basically tell you nothing about the weapon. That's a common theme. So let's begin with the smallest changes. I'm just going to have to tell you verbally. It used to recharge a little bit slower when uncloaked. How much slower? Do you want to guess? It's currently 15 seconds, so make your guess. Maybe it was 20? 25? The entire 30? Maybe it had no cloak regen bonus? No, 15.3. That's it. It was 0.3 seconds longer. I know, game shattering. However, it did have a few more notable differences. Remember how I alluded to the Cloak and Dagger having a cap for how much cloak you can lose based on speed, being Spy's movement speed? Well, used to not. So falling and being flung legit did zip a lot of your cloak away. Finally, even while uncloaked, you could not pick up ammo from ammo packs for the cloak meter, once again, not your revolver. It was at a reduced rate of 100% instead of 35%. And then I guess if you want to throw this in there, all Invis watches now have a 20% damage resistance while you are cloaked. This was not always a thing. The Cloak and Dagger is still a good item without a shadow of a doubt, but because it was the slightest bit worse, and a lot of the weapons below it had a little bit more contention, or just it wasn't as significant, this is where it ends up today, and it has still had a glow up in my books. Probably the most well-designed weapon on the list, to most people anyway. Jokes aside, the weapon I'm here to discuss got it right on day one. but has had some small changes that are significant enough to allow it to be so high up on this list. It's the Kritzkrieg.
Ha ha! What a bloodbath!
The Kritzkrieg is a great weapon, old too, being part of the first ever TF2 major patch, the Gold Rush update of 2008, aka the Medic update, and the update that introduced Payload as a game mode, sacrificing invulnerability for the chance to inflict maximum damage. The Kritzkrieg, as the name implies, instead of having a standard Uber charge, will give the patient 8 seconds of full crits, triple damage, no fall off, but it will not protect the medic during the duration. He is still completely vulnerable. It also comes with a 25% faster Uber charge build rate and a taunt that will heal for 11 health, which is interesting. The modern Kritzkrieg is a phenomenal side grade and is what most side grades should strive to be. It is a perfect example of opportunity costs. Crits are insanely strong and can allow you to mow through the other team, but you lack invulnerability. Like I said previously, pretty much knocked it out of the park day one, but because of where it is on the list, you can tell it wasn't always exactly as it is now. So let's go over the pretty inconsequential changes. It lacked a taunt that would heal you, so in the 1 in 1,000 chance you were set on fire or bleeding, and you happen to get around a quarter at low enough health where you could taunt, the modern day Kritzkrieg that gives you 11 health could possibly save you, assuming you're in that threshold. Pretty small but plausible, I guess, so there's that. Another one is slightly more significant. The Ubercharge build speed bonus was originally only 10% rather than the modern 25%. Okay, quick tangent. The weapon card claims to be 25% faster, but it takes 32 seconds instead of the standard 40 seconds, which would make it 20% faster, I believe, if I could do math correctly. Or is it 30 seconds theoretical and 32 is more realistic? I have no clue. Either way, it takes less time to build Uber. That's what you need to know. 8 seconds less. I guess you could also say it didn't have some of the quality of life stuff the modern day mediguns have. You couldn't match your patient's movement speed. That was originally only a feature on the quick fix. You couldn't build Uber charge 3 times faster during setup time. That wasn't always a feature. Uber charge now decays when you drop the medigun, but that's just because you can actually pick up mediguns now, which was not a feature for the first 7.5 years of TF2's life. Some people may not know, yeah, that was not always a feature. I believe it was in the gunmetal update that you got the ability to pick up weapons off the ground. There were a lot of small changes I could go over, such as the Kritzkrieg not working correctly on servers with random crits turned off, but this is the stuff that you need to know. The Kritzkrieg has in fact had a small but non-negligible glow up in the recent years. Maybe a surprise for some of you, but this weapon's had its fair share of changes. Honestly, for the worse, since it effectively became the de facto item for this slot, with rarely any other weapon getting time in the limelight outside of gimmick loadouts. That description I'm sure you already caught on. It's the sandwich.
I am full of sandwich, and I am coming for you!
The sandwich had a glow up? Indeed it did, and somewhat unfortunately, as it means that other heavy secondaries have been thrown to the side for some stale bread, rotten ham, and moldy cheese. I don't like the sandwich purely out of principle for this reason. I've explained how I prefer the shotgun to Locust Bar far more. But even so, I can't deny that sandwich is just really good. Taste-wise, I don't know, but a fat man knows his way around food, so I'd have to assume it does. The sandwich is a secondary item for heavy that replaces the shotgun. I know, classified info, don't go around telling people. Eating it takes about 4 seconds or so, and will heal you for 300 health. You can also drop it on the floor, and it will act as a medium health pack for whoever picks it up, whether friendly or not, except for the heavy himself. If nobody wants this floor sandwich, you can pick it up again for later use. It takes 30 seconds to recharge, but if you pick up any health pack, regardless of size, at full HP, it will regenerate immediately, meaning you don't have to wait the 30 seconds or go to a resupply cabinet. Also, if your sandwich does recharge, whether naturally or by picking up a health pack, whatever it may be, if there is a sandwich currently on the map, on the floor somewhere, it will immediately disappear once the heavy gets his sandwich back. The modern sandwich is pretty much the only thing I see heavies here in 2025 using. I feel like I spotted an albino buck or a 6-leaf clover if they're running anything else. Maybe a 5-leaf clover if it's second banana. I see that once in a while. But the shotgun, panic attack, family business, the locust bar, buffalo steak sandwich, outside of medieval mode, in a regular, normal loadout, forget about it. They're a completely rare breed. I do see the family business once in a while, but that's usually a gimmick loadout. That's just Fat Scout. I do concede it's hard to blame them because of the self-healing, as well as it being a medium health pack for your medic boyfriend or whoever needs it, which is only shared by the buffalo steak sandwich. It makes sense. It's really good. However, despite that, it wasn't always as it is today. The sandwich was the first unlock and competed with the shotgun, which to a lot of players meant it became the de facto secondary because even though the shotgun was far more useful back in the day due to the clunkiness of the minigun, we kind of touched on that in the Natasha segment, it was hard to utilize properly for the vast majority of people. Despite this, 2008 TF2 players would have crapped their pants had they been handed the modern day sandwich. First, let's discuss the one thing it had over the modern day sandwich. It didn't have to recharge. That's right, you could chomp down on this thing as much as you want, or as much as you need to do so, and it would just never go away. I know, it's a pretty sweet deal, and it seems like it's impossible to beat, but beaten it was, because while you did have this one thing going for it, everything else not so much. First, it didn't originally heal for 75 health per bite, which adds up to 300 for those who are a little bit, they have trouble with math. Instead, it healed for only 30 health per bite, adding up to a grand total of 120 rather than 300. So while you could continuously eat it, it healed less and took a lot longer. If you were at low health, say, 20 health, you would have to eat 3 of these to get back up to full health, and that would take 12 seconds. While that is bad, possibly the biggest sin of all, couldn't be dropped on the ground at all. All medic mains just shed a tear. Your big burly meat shield could not throw you a ham and cheese sandwich in the case you get a splinter. He couldn't even drop it for himself to get an instant medium health pack like he could for some years when they finally added that mechanic. Yep, he had to actually stop, taunt, and eat the sandwich. The original sandwich was not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but because of the quick healing and the ability to drop a medium health pack for anyone who needs it, I think it's safe to say it's had a decent glow up. We are officially in the top 3 and we've got a classic. I guess they're all classics to some degree, they're all original unlocks, but I got an item that just screams old school. People are likely to expect this weapon to not be considered a glow up, but as you can see, it is. It's a secondary I rarely ever see people run legitimately in actual loadouts, but when they do, they're either gods, or they absolutely suck because they went on YouTube and found a video on how to type give all into an achievement engineer server. I'm talking about the Bonk Atomic Punch.
Bonk! Too slow!
Bonk is a classic added all the way back in the Scout update of 2009, which was trying to give scouts a way to distract enemies and pacify sentry nests. We know this isn't always successful. We've all seen the Bonk Scout get pinned into a corner, but that is the main design principle. It can also act as a get out of jail free card as long as you break the line of sight in order to drink it. It does have to finish the animation. I've been caught out a few times trying to use it that way. Bonk puts you into a third-person point of view with this little trail and this air warping effect around your body. The drink has an 8-second duration, and while under the effects, you are completely invulnerable, with anybody hitting you having this little mist particle effect appear. To balance it out, you cannot shoot during this time, and depending on the damage taken, you'll be slowed down. 0% if you take no damage, 25% if you take any damage whatsoever, as long as it's under 200, and if you absorb more than 200 damage, you are slowed down by 50% for 5 full seconds once the timer has expired. All these effects are tied to a technically 30-second timer, but because it begins to recharge while you're under the effects, it's effectively 22 seconds. The Bonk is a very underutilized weapon, at least by competent players. I have seen Bonk Scouts wreak havoc on servers because they know how to maneuver using Bonk and are just really good at flanking, even when they do it right in front of you. Plus, as I already said, if a Bonk Scout manages to break the line of sight, he can consume the beverage and just take off with 8 seconds of invulnerability at normal speed. It's hard to do anything against someone who knows what they're doing, but that is precisely the problem. Most scouts who use this item rarely are very good at using it, so it seems a lot worse than it is in all honesty. And plus, you could try to track them down, and a lot of times scouts don't know where they're going or whatever, so they just end up getting killed, and they're easy pickings. It's also considered worse than it really is due to the unnecessary nerf it got a few years back. For a long time, Bonk lacked any drawback for actually taking damage during its effects. I will say I understand the change, but it wasn't completely necessary in the slightest, especially in a casual setting. Despite all the yapping I've done thus far, the Bonk has still had a glow up. The original Bonk was pretty much identical to today in terms of function. No shooting while under the effects, full invulnerability, the little swooshing, whatever, you get it. It pretty much works the exact same. But there are 2 differences that made the Bonk better now than it was in 2009. First, the duration. Bonk used to only last 6 seconds rather than the modern day 8. You now get an additional 2 seconds of full invulnerability. Another downside is one that a lot of people are unaware of, but Bonk originally had a drawback for consuming it. Yeah, originally your run speed would be cut in half. Actually, I think it's like 55, 56% or so for a full 6 seconds to match the original duration. Afterwards, regardless of how much damage you took, just consuming it will give you this drawback. It would always cut your movement speed in half, about half. It also lacked recharge altogether, requiring to resupply locker in order to get a fresh one. What benefits were there to the old one? Well, none, that's it. It didn't last as long, 2 seconds shorter. The slowdown effect was applied regardless of damage taken, and it didn't recharge naturally. As I said, the slowdown was also slightly heftier, lasting 1 second longer and being a little bit worse. I mean, 50% versus 56%, not a big deal, but it's there. The Bonk was not a bad weapon, maybe subpar compared to the original 2009 Force Nature and Sandman, but it wasn't bad. It wouldn't be atrocious today. It wouldn't be as good as it is now, in my opinion, even though a lot of people think the Bonk sucks, but it wouldn't be terrible. It still had a significant glow up, in my opinion. Let's go look at our silver medal winner today. There are just 2 weapons we have to go over, and unless you've been paying close attention, you probably don't know which ones. But pause the video and guess. You don't need to comment, even though I would love it if you did. But just guess, what do you think it is? Oh wait, you got it? The silver medal winner of today's video, very long video I might add, is... Did you expect this weapon to be so high up on the list? Be honest with me, but yeah, the flare gun has had a massive glow up, and one could argue it deserves to be in the number 1 spot, but I think there is one weapon that just beats it out a little bit more. The current flare gun is a simple weapon. The flare gun has 16 flares to work with, fires a projectile at 2,000 hammer units that will deal 30 damage on the initial hit, and it will ignite enemies for 7.5 seconds, dealing 4 damage per tick, so about 8 damage per second or so. The weapon guarantees a critical if you hit an enemy who has already been ignited, regardless of the source. So whether that's the cow mangler, your flamethrower, or the flare gun itself. If they're on fire, they'll take 90 damage. The flare gun also has the ability to reload while holstered, learned that not too long ago. Thought that was a Crusader's crossbow exclusive, but it seems that is not the case. The modern flare gun, despite being so old, is a certified hood classic, and is a go-to combo tool, seeing as the reserve shooter is no longer piss easy to use. That was a fun time in history, for sure. The flare gun is great for pestering enemies at long distances, comboing, and is a good range tool for a class that is handicapped due to his range. This is how the weapon has always been supposed to function, but it wasn't always so good at its job. I wouldn't say it was ineffective. It certainly was good at doing what it was supposed to, however, it was a bit weaker than it is today. First, let's talk about the neutral changes that I would consider a slight downside, but technically weird stuff. In 2017, all flare guns' afterburn duration was reduced by 2.5 seconds from 10 to 7.5, but the afterburn damage was increased from 3 to 4 per tick, so 8 per second instead of 6. Now that we got that out of the way, and not very long, we can discuss the actual differences of the flare gun itself. First, the flare gun didn't do as much damage originally. Instead of 30 damage on hit like it does today, it only did 20 on a direct hit. To make it worse, and I think this is the biggest sin of all, it didn't do any increased damage versus burning enemies. No, it didn't crit, nor did it mini crit. It would eventually get the stat to mini crit versus burning enemies a bit later on, and then that would be changed to mini crit up close while critting at mid to long range. And then that would be changed to critting at all ranges, but the 2008 version of the flare gun could not crit at all, so hitting somebody who was on fire would just do 20 damage. Similar to how the original loose cannon was, where it could double donk without actually having a double donk effect. The flare guns could still be a solid 1-2 punch type weapon, but it was just 20 damage. That's all. No crit, nothing special. The flare gun is a great weapon nowadays, and still was solid for its time. Like I said, this is 2008, it's a little bit different of a time, but it would likely not have as much love today if it hadn't been touched whatsoever. It was a need for some tuning up, and luckily, we got it slowly but surely. With the flare gun done, that brings us to our winner of today's video, the weapon that has had the biggest glow up from its original version. Let's go see what it is.
Hello again, dumbbell.
Surprised? You might be. This weapon's placement likely comes as a shock to a lot of you, especially after what they did to this weapon in Jungle Inferno. But even so, the Ambassador has had one hell of a transformation as of recent. The modern Ambassador has the ability to crit on headshot, but as the distance between you and your enemy increases, the crit damage will fall off until about at around 1200 hammer units, about the distance between the two forts on 2 fort. It will be unable to crit and will just deal normal damage beyond that range. It also has a few funky stats compared to the revolver that are not immediately apparent. Before I get into that, I have to point this out. I thought this was hilarious. According to the TF2 wiki, which by the way, I do not use exclusively. I know a lot of you probably think I just read the wiki. What I actually do is I cross-reference with the wiki, and then I look up old videos, and that's how I got the original wording for the stats. And that's also why a lot of the original version of weapons are listed kind of weird and have funky wording. It's because I use the original wording for a lot of them. There might be a few that I forgot, but most of them use that funky wording because I actually looked up the old videos for it. But back on track and about the wiki. According to the wiki, it lists the Ambassador at 8 pounds or 3.6 kilograms. I mean, what the actual hell? That is about 4 ounces more than the weight of a loaded M4 carbine with a 30-round box magazine. I mean, dude's got 4 arms of steel. The average revolver is much closer to 24 to 36 ounces, or about 1.5 pounds to 2-ish pounds. But nerd tangent out of the way, the Ambassador, talking about the Ambassador now, here we go, focus back in. The Ambassador is only able to headshot every 1 second or so due to the spread recovery cooldown. For the rest of the revolvers, it really only impacts accuracy, with the first shot being completely accurate, and then you gotta wait for the cooldown for it to be accurate again. But for the Ambassador, it does this, and it displays this with the enlarged crosshair that slowly shrinks down to its size to indicate when the spread is reset. But the reason it does that is because it also makes you unable to headshot during this time. The one good thing is it actually has a secret about 20% faster spread recovery, because it only takes 1 second to recover rather than the standard 1.25 seconds of all the other revolvers. With the nitty-gritty done, here are the actual listed downsides of the weapon, because it can only crit on headshot, that's the only upside. It has a 15% damage penalty, which reduces the base damage from 40 to 34, explaining why it does 102 damage on a crit headshot and not 120. It has a 20% slower firing speed, taking 0.6 seconds instead of half a second. No random critical hits, and then the aforementioned crit fall-off penalty, which actually does apply to all types of crits, not just those from headshots. It applies to non-headshot crits, such as crits, creed crits, and end-around crits also. Didn't know that for a long time, but all crits. The Ambassador may not be as good as it was for a number of years prior to Jungle Inferno, and in my personal opinion, it should not have been nerfed as much as it was. But with that being said, I would take this weapon, the modern version, 9 times out of 10 over the original Ambassador, maybe even 10 times out of 10. Let's discuss a few things that the original Ambassador actually had going for it. First, crits didn't fall off. There's that. That's how it was for 8 years. 2, while there was a spread recovery just like today, you could headshot during this time if you managed to get lucky. And 3, for some reason, just like the Sydney Sleeper on launch, it could penetrate enemies. While now we think of the Machina, Righteous Bison, Original Pomson, and Dragon's Fury, maybe if you're a Pyro main, as the penetrating weapons, for a long time I thought the Machina was the first to do it, until I learned the Bison came out and was the first to do it, surprisingly. And then I thought it was the Bison, and then I found out, nope. Spy's 8-pound of steel revolver was the first weapon to be able to penetrate in the game for some reason. And no, the Sydney Sleeper penetrating enemies was not a joke, that was actually a thing. Despite these 3 pretty strong differences, I have, of course, left out the one thing that kind of ruined the weapon day one. I did a little foreshadowing a lot earlier in the video. The Sniper vs. Spy update introduced mini crits as a concept, and the one weapon that is the forefront of that is the Girardi. Obviously, as it still works nearly the same exact way as it did in 2009. However, it was not the only weapon that utilized mini crits. That's right, when the Ambassador was introduced to the game, it did not crit on headshot, it mini crit on headshot. I know, crazy. Dealing only about 68 to 69 damage on headshot. Sure, it could do it at any range, but that was it. Enough to 2-shot a sniper using the Razorback as it was mostly intended to do, but other than that, you couldn't 2-shot soldiers, pyros, demoman, medics. You couldn't 3-shot heavies. It did way less damage. Sure, it had the range unlike today, and it had some of the small quality of life stuff, but all you got for hitting a nice clean headshot was 9 more damage than the stock revolver could do at close range. Yes, I said it could do it at all ranges, but that's it. All for a damage penalty on body shots, a slower firing speed, and the inability to random crit, which I guess isn't the biggest deal, but it's there. The mini crit on headshot lasted for 5 days, from the 21st of May to the 26th of May, and this was no small change either. We're talking about going from a 35% damage bonus to a 200% damage bonus. Just think about that. I think while the flare gun was a contender, the Ambassador deserves the #1 spot in today's video as having the best transformation and the biggest glow up, and then a slight glow down in 2017, but even so, it's leagues ahead of where it was on release day. You made it to the end. Sweet. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I would appreciate it if you left a like if you liked it. Comment if you want to ask any questions or want to correct me on anything I missed, and you can also dislike it as well. That's okay. As of now, I do have something planned for August, but it's going to be much more low-key as I need an extra month to work on the next project. It's not going to be what you think it is. I know a lot of you have been complaining about my mic quality as well. I kind of alluded to that in the intro. I did actually spend some money and got one. I originally planned to use it for this video. Here's a clip of the original audio for the intro.
I hope you guys like the slightly improved mic quality. I finally caved in and bought a new microphone. No, I didn't drop a rack on it, but I did put some of my CS Crate gambling money towards a new square microphone, so I hope you at the bare minimum like it more than before.
Well, that sounded okay. It took me 4 hours to even get a good sounding clip. And when I attempted to record the Sandman, I realized it just didn't sound right. It peaked too much, and that was mostly because I'm not used to it. It's not a good microphone. I think I'm going to have to kind of put off and maybe try to get my bread up and get a better microphone eventually. Anyway, once again, thank you for watching. Take care.